All right, so we're diving into Boudica's revolt today. This isn't just like some dusty history lesson.
Hmm.
We're talking about a queen who stood up to the mighty Roman Empire in 60 AD. Boudica was the queen of the Iceni tribe in Roman-occupied Britain.
Yeah, her story is just like a reminder that even the most powerful empires can be challenged. What we'll see is this clash of wills, this fight for freedom against like overwhelming odds.
Definitely. To kind of set the stage, Boudica's husband Prosudigus ruled the Iceni as a Roman ally. He actually tried to safeguard his people's future by naming Emperor Nero a co-heir in his will, alongside his own daughters. But that backfired when Prosudigus died.
Yeah, the Romans, instead of honoring the will, they just went in and took over. They annexed the Iceni kingdom, seized their
Yeah.
property, and, to add insult to injury, Boudica and her daughters were subjected to horrific treatment. This was like the fuse on an already tense situation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's important to remember that the Iceni had already rebelled against the Romans back in 47 AD. So this wasn't their first rodeo. But this time the stakes were even higher, fueled by Boudica's personal fury and the Iceni's warrior spirit.
Right, and we get a glimpse into this fury through Tacitus and Cassius Dio. These are two Roman historians who documented the events years later.
Right, the Annals by Tacitus and Roman History by Dio. There are main sources for understanding this revolt. Though it's worth noting that Dio tends to be a bit more dramatic, shall we say.
That's a polite way of putting it. But
Yeah.
even with, their potential biases,
Mm.
they offer invaluable insights into the events that unfolded.
Yeah, so with tensions already simmering, the revolt erupted with the Iceni leading the charge. And they weren't alone. Other tribes, like the Trinovantes, who had their own scores to settle, joined the uprising. It quickly became a full-blown rebellion with freedom as the battle cry.
And they made a powerful statement right out of the gate. Their first target was Camulodunum, present-day Colchester. This wasn't just any settlement. It was a Roman colonia, a mini-Rome designed to showcase Roman dominance.
Oh, wow, a symbol of Roman power. The rebels didn't just burn buildings. They tore down the Temple of Claudius. It was a direct assault on the emperor's authority.
And when the Roman commander Quintus Petilius Cerealis tried to intervene with his legion, he walked right into a disaster. His entire infantry was wiped out. Only Cerealis and a handful of cavalry escaped. This sent shockwaves through Roman Britain, showing that the rebels were a force to be reckoned with.
Wow, the Romans were clearly caught off guard. Boudica's forces, now bolstered by thousands of recruits, went on to attack two more vital Roman cities, Londinium, London as we know it, and Verulamium.
Now, the Roman governor at the time, Suetonius Paulinus, was no slouch when it came to military strategy. But even he realized that defending Londinium against this massive force was a losing battle. He made the tough call to abandon the city.
Imagine being a citizen in Londinium at that time. The panic, the uncertainty, it must have been terrifying.
It was. And what followed was a brutal chapter in this conflict. Both Londinium and Verulamium were burned to the ground, and the sources don't shy away from describing the atrocities committed on both sides.
Yeah, Tacitus and Dio paint a grim picture. Tens of thousands of Roman citizens and those loyal to Rome were killed. This was a bloodbath, a testament to the raw fury and chaos that had been unleashed.
Yeah, but amid this chaos, Suetonius Paulinus was regrouping, getting ready to face Boudica in a decisive confrontation. He wasn't about to let this rebellion spiral out of control. This is where Roman military discipline really comes into play.
So he picked his battleground carefully, opting for a defile, a narrow passage, with a wood at his back. This limited the Britons' numerical advantage and gave his legions a tactical edge. Still, he was outnumbered. Dio even claims Boudica's army had swelled to 230,000 warriors.
Those numbers are probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, but it's clear that the Romans were up against a massive force at the Battle of Watling Street.
So how did they manage to turn the tide?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in part 2. The clash between Suetonius and Boudica was a pivotal moment in this story, showcasing both Roman military might and the tragic consequences of rebellion. So last time we left off, Suetonius and Boudica are about to clash at the Battle of Watling Street. This was it, the moment of truth for both the rebels and the Romans.
Yeah, I'm picturing this scene. You've got the Roman legions, all disciplined and heavily armed, facing off against this vast but less organized force of Britons, all fueled by their, burning desire for freedom. It must have been an epic sight.
Oh, it was a clash of styles for sure. You have the Romans known for their strategic formations and coordinated tactics versus the Britons relying on ferocity and sheer numbers.
But in the end, we know the Romans won. How does Suetonius manage to pull off such a decisive victory, despite being so heavily outnumbered?
Well, a couple of factors played in his favor. First, that carefully chosen battlefield, remember the defile, that narrow passage really limited the Britons' ability to maneuver. It negated their numerical advantage. They couldn't all swarm the Romans at once.
Ah, so he turned their strength into a weakness.
No.
Smart.
Exactly. And then you have to factor in Roman military training and discipline. The legions were professional soldiers, drilled to fight as a unit. They had superior weaponry and armor, and they knew how to use it effectively.
Whereas the Britons, while fierce warriors, were more accustomed to tribal warfare, not this kind of large-scale, organized conflict.
Right. They had courage and determination, but they lacked the Romans' level of training and coordination. It was a brutal fight, no doubt. Heavy casualties on both sides. But the end, Roman discipline and tactics prevailed.
So what happened to Boudica after this defeat?
Well, her fate is a bit of a mystery. Tacitus claims that she took her own life by poison, choosing death over capture, and humiliation at the hands of the Romans.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful image. A queen refusing to bow to her conquerors even in defeat.
It is. But Dio suggests that she fell ill and died, perhaps from wounds or sickness after the battle. We don't know for certain what happened, but either way, her death marked the end of the revolt.
That's interesting how even her death has these different versions, almost like people wanted to shape her legacy in a particular way.
Exactly, and that's what makes Boudica so fascinating. Her story has resonated through the centuries, and she's been interpreted and reinterpreted in so many ways.
She's been hailed as a freedom fighter, a feminist icon, a symbol of British resistance. But some also see her as a ruthless barbarian who inflicted terrible violence on Roman citizens.
Right, and that's the thing about history. It's not always black and white. There are shades of gray,
Yeah.
complexities that we have to grapple with.
I guess that's why we're so drawn to these figures like Boudica. They challenge us to think critically, to question the narratives that we've been told.
They force us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the past and to understand that history is rarely simple or straightforward.
So with the revolt crushed and Boudica gone, what happened next? Did the Romans just go back to business as usual in Britain?
Not exactly. Boudica's rebellion was a major wake-up call for the Romans. It showed them that their grip on Britain was not as secure as they'd thought. They couldn't just rule through brute force. They needed to address some of the underlying grievances that had led to this uprising.
So did they actually change their approach after the revolt?
To some extent, yes. They adopted a more conciliatory approach in certain areas, trying to appease local leaders and integrate them into the Roman system of governance. They also made some adjustments to their tax policies, which had been a major source of resentment.
So it was like a combination of carrot and stick, trying to appease some while still maintaining a firm hand.
Precisely. And it wasn't always successful. There were still plenty of tensions, and there would be other rebellions in the years to come. But Boudica's revolt definitely forced the Romans to rethink their approach to ruling Britain.
It's amazing to think how one woman, in a relatively short period, could have such a profound impact on the course of history.
It is. And it speaks to the power of individual action, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the sources we've been relying on to tell this story. We've mentioned Tacitus and Dio, but it's important to remember that they were both writing from a Roman perspective, years after the events took place.
Right. They weren't exactly objective observers. Tacitus, for example, was a senator and historian who held some pretty strong views about Roman virtue and barbarian savagery. It's likely that his account of Boudica was shaped by those views.
So we have to take their words with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. We need to read them critically, be aware of their potential biases, and consider other perspectives whenever possible.
Are there any other sources that shed light on this period, maybe from a British perspective?
Unfortunately, no. The Britons didn't have a written language at this time, so their side of the story is largely lost to us. We have to piece together their experiences through archaeology, through the interpretations of Roman accounts, and through a bit of informed speculation.
So there's still a lot that we don't know, a lot of gaps to fill in.
There is, and that's part of what makes history so compelling. It's not just about memorizing facts and dates. It's about grappling with unknowns, piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, and trying to understand the motivations and experiences of people who lived long ago.
And sometimes those missing pieces are the most intriguing part of the story.
Absolutely. They spark our curiosity, they challenge us to think creatively, and they remind us that history is an ongoing conversation, not a finished book.
Speaking of conversations, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've seen the clash at Watling Street, explored the aftermath of the revolt, and even delved into the complexities of our sources.
But there's still more to discuss. In our final act, we'll shift our focus to the legacy of Boudica,
Yeah.
how her story has been interpreted and reinterpreted over time, and what it can teach us about resistance, leadership, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
So stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive. We'll be right back. All right, so we're back. We've journeyed through the fires of revolt, the clash of armies at Watling Street, and even grappled with the biases of our Roman historians. But the story of Boudica, it doesn't end with her defeat or the fading echoes of battle.
Right. What's really captivating about Boudica is that she kind of transcended the limitations of her time. She became something much larger, a symbol that continues to resonate centuries later.
Yeah, we touched on how she's been viewed as a freedom fighter, feminist icon, even a symbol of British resistance. I'm curious, though, how has her image evolved over time? Has the way we perceive her changed?
Oh, absolutely. For example, during the Victorian era, when Britain was at the height of its empire building, Boudica was often portrayed as this noble warrior queen, a figure who embodied strength and defiance.
Almost like a proto-Britannia, leading her people against a foreign oppressor.
Exactly. Her image was used to bolster a sense of national pride and to justify, in some ways, the expansion of British power.
But that seems like a pretty one-dimensional view, doesn't it? Especially when you consider the complexities of Roman Britain and the fact that Boudica was leading a rebellion against what was, at the time, a pretty established power structure.
You're right. And as our understanding of history has evolved, so too has our perception of Boudica. In more recent times, she's been seen less as a simplistic symbol of national strength and more as a complex figure who represents resistance against oppression, regardless of the specific historical context.
So she's become more of a universal symbol of rebellion.
In a way, yes. Her story resonates with anyone who has fought for freedom, for justice, for the right to determine their own destiny.
And that makes sense, the desire for autonomy, to resist those who seek to control or exploit you. That's a human story that transcends any particular time or place.
Precisely. And that's why Boudica's story continues to be relevant today. It speaks to the power of individual courage, the willingness to stand up for what you believe in, even when the odds seem insurmountable.
Yeah, it's inspiring, really. She was a woman in a world dominated by men, leading a revolt against one of the most powerful empires in history. Talk about defying expectations.
She certainly did. And her story reminds us that even the most established power structures are vulnerable. They can be challenged. They can be shaken by acts of resistance, however large or small.
It's a reminder that change is always possible, that the status quo can be disrupted, even if it seems like an uphill battle.
Absolutely.
So after diving deep into this story, what are like the key takeaways for you? What does Boudica's revolt teach us about leadership, resistance, and the human spirit?
Well, for me, it's about the importance of courage, conviction, and the willingness to fight for what you believe in, even when it seems like a losing battle.
It's about recognizing that power is never absolute, that those in positions of authority can be challenged, and that even the smallest acts of resistance can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, Boudica's story also underscores the complexity of history. It's not just about good guys and bad guys, victors and vanquished. It's about understanding the motivations and perspectives of all those involved, even those whose voices have been lost to time.
It's about recognizing that our interpretations of the past are shaped by our own present, our own values and biases. And it's about constantly questioning, reevaluating, and seeking a more complete understanding of the forces that have shaped our world.
And it's about remembering that history is alive. It's not just a collection of dusty facts and dates. It's a story that continues to unfold, a conversation that we're all a part of.
That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Boudica's revolt, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. What stories from your own history, your own family, your own community are waiting to be unearthed, waiting to be shared, waiting to inspire the next generation?
Go out and explore, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and never stop learning.
Yeah.
Because within those stories, within the echoes of the past, lie the seeds of our future.
Well said. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive. And to our listeners, thank you for being part of the conversation. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.